Thank you to the organisers for putting this together and for inviting me to talk to you today. I want to talk to you about how you can pick up commercial skills and prepare yourself for a transition into industry if that is something that you are interested. And I'll do this from my own perspective. I spent a long time as an academic and then transitioned into a career in industry. Who am I? My name is Dr. Michelle Veltman. So this is a sort of brief academic CV, if you will. I have a BSc in experimental psychology from the University of Bristol, a PhD in cognitive neuroscience from the University of Cambridge, and I've been working in labs in Melbourne and in Oxford as a postdoc for several years, and now I'm Director of Neuroscience R&D at Cambridge Cognition. So I want to share with you my career trajectory, the sort of timeline of all the key moments in my career. And this is really by way of illustrating that it's not a really simple direct path. And in some ways it is, but there were lots of experiences and extra things that I did alongside my academic career that I believe put me in a good place to transition into industry. As I mentioned, I did a BSc in experimental psychology, that was back in 2003. And then I went to Singapore where I worked as a research assistant, where I really learned how to operate an MRI scanner and to collect MRI images, also do EEG. So I got most of my brain imaging, brain mapping experience from there. After this, I was lucky enough to get an internship at the University of Cambridge, where I ran a lot of behavioural tasks, and I really enjoyed that experience. I liked working with my supervisor, decided to apply for a PhD there, and was lucky enough to get a scholarship. During my PhD, I didn't think a lot about what I would do afterwards. I sort of knew that the next step was fellowships or postdocs. And so I tried to get as much experience as I could while I was doing my PhD. And some of that was useful leadership skills, things that could be applied in other positions for academia. Now, towards the end of my PhD, I ran out of funding. My scholarship only covered 3 years and I was getting into the 4th year. And so as a result of that, while I wrote up my PhD, I actually took a job as a higher statistical officer in a government department called DEC, the now defunct Department of Energy and Climate Change. And there I really got my first taste of what it's like to work outside of academia in a fairly serious high level position, and what it's like to interact with industry. So a lot of my job was collecting oil and gas data from the big oil and gas companies in order to model supplies in the country. And the primary aim of that really was to get a decent paying job that could support me while I was writing up my PhD. And in the meantime, I had actually secured a position in as a postdoc in a lab in Melbourne. I want to highlight where I've actually gotten experience commercially in industry and how that's helped me within my academic career trajectory, but I think was a major part in being able to get the industry position that I did. So as I mentioned, I did a position as a higher statistical officer, and that was the first time that I was using the statistical analytical techniques that I had developed in my PhD and applying it in an industry commercial setting. Towards the middle of my second postdoc, I started to do some freelance consulting. My first freelance consulting position was arranged through my university's enterprise office, and from there I just really enjoyed it, so I started to do more freelance work. I also founded a startup with a colleague, actually nothing to do with our postdoc work, but it was my first experience of going through an accelerator, and that was an amazing experience for learning how companies work. The position that I'm in now as Director of Neuroscience is, I would consider, my first full move into industry, where it is unlikely that I'll go back into academia. So one of the things people ask me most frequently is what my job's like, what it's like to do consultancy, what my position is like now, what I do day to day. So I thought I'd take you through that to give you a sense of what it's like. If you're interested in consultancy, I would highly recommend visiting or speaking to your university's enterprise office. Speak to people who arrange these consultancies and let them know that you are interested. Often the opportunities are for more senior people, but there are opportunities that come up. And so it's worth them knowing about you. And if you have a wide network, which you should be starting to build, then quite often consultancy comes from recommendations from people within your network who know what you do. And for them to know that, you need to be very active in saying what it is that you do. Quite often, because my LinkedIn is very well set up, I get personally contacted by recruiters, by consultants, by agencies for consulting jobs. My first consulting job was for a startup which is a spin out from Oxford University called OHBM, and they do gamified training for companies for scale up. The brief for this consulting work was to design an experiment and then assess the effectiveness of their gamified training. So I really had to understand what the client's desired outcomes were. What were they trying to show? What were the metrics that they were using? If their training was effective, what was the outcome? And then I had to design experiments around that. So using their gamified training, I had to design experiment, recruit, analyze, interpret the data, and then really create reports and figures that would be used in their pitch decks and that they could use to understand more about their technology. You'll notice that the things that I was doing were not very dissimilar to what I do or what I was doing in my day job as a cognitive neuroscientist. Designing experiments, understanding what the outcomes are and how we can test them, really being able to communicate that information effectively. My tips for consultancy are to try to go through your university enterprise office. And that's important because they often will take a cut of your consultancy fee, but it means that they provide all your insurance and you don't have to worry about personal indemnity insurance. And they can manage all of the financial aspects of it. Ensure that when you do this, you set reasonable rates. So ask around, ask people who've done consultancy what their rates are, ask your university enterprise office or an agency if you're going through them what the standard rates are, and don't undersell yourself. Be prepared to give away some of your time for free. To be honest, the rate usually is high enough that you feel like you're compensated ultimately anyway. So, take a half-hour meeting to discuss and share your expertise, but of course don't give any information away for free. And this is where I think it's a really good experience for what you might do if you decide to leave academia. Always think about it from a commercial perspective. So it's very easy when you come from an academic background to think really deeply about small details that are not as important for your clients. It's really important to have a commercial understanding and mindset that the decisions you make really are usually at the benefit for the client's customers or shareholders or stakeholders. Current position is Director of Neuroscience R&D for Cambridge Cognition. If you're not aware of Cambridge Cognition, they are a spin out originally from Cambridge University and were one of the first to take all the kind of cognitive tests and put them on tablets to be able to do cognitive testing within clinics and for clinical trials. And since then are now a platform for decentralized trials and create tasks that can be remotely distributed on smartphones, on smartwatches, and that's really for the benefit of doing remote clinical trials. So I'll take you through my responsibilities as my job, and when I do this, I really want you to think about whether you think you would be qualified for this job. A key part of my role is developing the academic collaborations that we have, and also initiating new collaborations. So if we're interested in a certain cognitive test and we know that there are academics out there who are using that test or working in particular populations, then we'll reach out and collaborate with them so that we can strongly validate our scientific tools. So a lot of my work is doing validation of our product. So if we have a cognitive test, showing that that cognitive test is sensitive to perhaps early cognitive decline, or that it's appropriate for use in different populations. I also provide clinical and statistical scientific consultancy. So we might be working with a partner and they have questions about what our cognitive tasks are tapping into, what these results mean, what would be the best battery of cognitive tasks to use, what questionnaires they should use. That sort of consultancy I provide, as well as statistical and design methods. I also design new cognitive tasks that can be used in clinical trials. So if we have a new drug being developed, or there's a new population that we're interested in, then part of my job is to develop cognitive tasks that would be useful for that. I have to disseminate the research findings that I have at conferences and in peer-reviewed publications, and that is again for scientific validation, but also to make people aware of the products we have and the services that we have. And I also use existing data to gain new insights, to develop new variables, to see how these tasks could be used in different populations. So I think if you take a look at my responsibilities written like that and explained like that, then it probably doesn't seem too dissimilar to academia. I collaborate, I do science every day, I do statistics, I do experimental design, I go to conferences, I write papers. Now I think if you probably saw my job description, it might look a little bit different to that, but fundamentally those are the things that I'm doing. I often get asked about what my day-to-day is like. This is my week. In green you can see what is our regular meetings. Everything else varies quite a lot from week to week, and depending on the kind of conference season, and the things that come up in the company. A weekly lab meeting, and that's not too dissimilar from lab meetings in academia, where we all report on what we're working on, any blockers. I then have a regular consortium research forum, which is when someone from a very large research consortium that involves many universities and many pharmaceutical and biotech companies, somebody from there will present some of their latest findings from the data that we're gathering. On Tuesdays, I catch up with my chief scientific officer, so that's my line manager, and we discuss ongoing projects. At the moment, we're working on a new playbook. Playbook is all of the scientific validation and research around a particular clinical group or a particular symptom. And that's all put together by a lot of other scientists, a majority of them PhDs. I have blocks of time in which I can do analysis, so I'll be analysing data from collaborators or from partners or from consulting, and that will all be for the purposes of, as I said before, validating our products or finding new insights. Another consortium meeting, so these are quite frequent because there's lots of things going on. It's a very large consortium and there's a lot of people involved, and it's gaining data from many sites very rapidly. So those are quite regular meetings. I have academic collaboration meetings where I speak to academics that we're working together with, see how things are going, see how we can help them, discuss any future projects that we might work on together. I quite often have meetings with new collaborators, so this I really enjoy, speaking to people in areas that are similar to what I know, but not necessarily. For example, we have academic collaborators in the field of schizophrenia, and so I've learned so much about that recently, and it's always really great for me to talk to new collaborators and think about ways that we can work together. And again, another block of time for analysis, very similar to what I would be doing in academia. And then we have things like ops meetings where we're just ensuring that the way that we're doing our research is optimal. I want to give you some practical skills to take away with you, and this is whether you stay in academia or you move into industry or you're interested in exploring other options outside of academia. So my 3 tenets are: develop your skills, develop your network, and develop yourself personally. Develop generalizable skills. These are things that are going to be good for you no matter what you do in your career. Things like leadership, things like management, managing finances, those are things that you need to have an awareness of, whether you stay in academia or whatever career you go to. As academics, we're used to learning all the time, but sometimes we don't do this as strategically as we could. Think about the skills that you need. If there's a career that you have in mind, or once you've explored other options, find out what the skills you need for those and get them. If there are advancements in fields that are tangentially related to you, so for example, there are big advancements in digital medicine, there's huge advancements in AI, as everybody knows. Get yourself skilled up on those because they will be useful for you. Use your technical skills to keep yourself highly competitive and highly desirable as a candidate for lots of jobs. So for example, all of these huge advances in generative AI, larger language models, see how you can use those within your research and academia, and at the same time that's giving you the skills that you can use in many, many industries. Develop your network. So this is one that often people dread, and immediately it comes to mind these awful networking drinks where you're kind of standing around and trying to make conversation with people. It doesn't have to be like that. Build your profile based on you and your interests and your expertise. There's always an audience for that. Join communities of people, like-minded people. Maybe it's academics, PhDs looking to leave academia. Maybe it's people doing a particular type of method. Say you're interested in EEG or academic work as an EEG. Go and find the companies that are developing the headsets. Go and find the companies that are using the technologies, the sleep companies. Network with those people. Reach out to people. Just connect with them. Ask them about themselves. Find out things you want to know about their careers or what they're doing. Ask for introductions. If you see that somebody that you know is connected to somebody from an industry that you like, or that you're interested, or a company that you're interested, just ask for a warm introduction. Be open and generous with your time and skill. So for a lot of projects, I did free consulting on the basis that it led to advisory board positions, and that it greatly expanded my network and people knew that I could be relied on. Now that's different to doing free consultancy. I can take meetings with people for half an hour to give them some insight. That's very different to doing consultancy for free. You never know who it is that's going to be recommending you. I've been recommended for consulting work where it's through somebody who knew me from something else completely and just knew my character and knew my expertise, and so was really happy to recommend me. So I think personal development can be really easily neglected. Sometimes we think that when we're doing things like chairing a committee, or we are working on a grant or a paper or a new collaboration, that those things are just naturally personal development. You need to set aside time to really think deeply about what you want to achieve and how you're going to get there. Very few people, myself included, ever sit down and really think about what are their values, what are their passions, what's important to them. Really think about that and reflect on how their career is fitting those things. Really step back and take time to think. It's very easy to just go from step to step to step without really reflecting on whether you're on the path that you want to be on. Make conscious decisions, because we go from PhD, from research assistant, PhD, and then onto a postdoc, and then the next postdoc, the fellowship, the early career, the mid-career. Each step is so well defined that sometimes we just get caught in trying to get to the next step and not thinking about what we really actually want. Please feel free to reach out to me. Don't be afraid to reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. Because I found the whole transition into industry really difficult, and I didn't really even know what was out there. Since I've left, I've been absolutely inundated with people asking me these questions, and that's why I really like to do things like this, where I can talk to lots of people. I've created a Discord community so that you can ask me questions, and those questions can be available to other people, and that people can network with each other. I've also created a course, so I encourage you to go and download that so you can get a really practical, in-depth advice and tasks to help you decide whether you want to stay in academia, and if you don't, find yourself a position in industry. I also want to highlight a fellow OHBM's book, Academia and the World Beyond, Chris Madden, who has a new volume coming out, and these are really excellent 30 interviews of people in different industries and giving you a sense of, how they got there, why they left.